Hey guys, Mathel here once again, and wouldn't you know it, I have another build to show you all. So for the past couple of days, I've been playing with the Tornado Shot Death's Opus assassin character that I've made, and Death's Opus is the upgraded version of the Death's Harp bow. Now, it is somewhat of a starter bow since it only requires level 44, but it can also have quite a lot of endgame potential, as a lot of people already know. It's seen as the sort of younger brother of the Reach of the Council, and the reason for that is because it has 2 additional arrows while Reach of the Council has 4 additional arrows. But it has a bit less DPS than Reach of the Council, while also having a lot greater crit multi, thus making up some of that damage. So in the end, the greatest difference is 2 arrows versus 4 arrows, but you can still very much get away with the Death's Opus doing pretty much everything, and with the very large crit multi it provides of 150, it can probably give a bigger bleed than a Reach of the Council could otherwise. As well as that, it does have a slightly higher base crit, so getting to closer to your crit cap is a lot easier with this bow, and I've chosen it basically because it's still fairly cheap, and I wanted to focus on my bleeds just as much as I do my poisons in this assassin type build, so I'm not just trying to purely scale chaos, because I do value the bleed quite a lot in this bow too. That said, however, Reach of the Council does mean that you typically would take out GMP or any sort of additional arrow in your setup and then use something better, but for this sort of setup I'm not sure there is too much better that I can do except for maybe a crit multi. So ultimately Reach of the Council could definitely be better, but for the most part I think the Death's Opus can scale easier into the end game with less substantial or amazing gear, I think. And that said, my gear is still pretty good, and I'm using the 2 additional secondary Tornado Shot projectile helm enchant. I'll show you exactly what that does in a second, but essentially every time you fire off a Tornado Shot, each one of your projectiles will fire off 3 additional projectiles. The enchant gives you an additional 2, so you're then firing off 5, and that makes your AoE a lot nicer, cover a lot more ground, as well as that you'll also have better single targets. So it's a very nice helm enchant, and well, you pay for it dearly as well. It did cost me about an Exalt on a Hubris helm, which obviously isn't ideal for my character. But so far, the character's been performing great as just pure Tornado Shot. The goal here was to scale bleed, poison, physical damage, all of the above, and have pure Tornado Shot single target. So as we all know, Barrage is quite insane, especially with Dying Sun and with 2 Barrage Helm Enchant, but I already know that, and we already know that at this point. I wanted to see if we can do a pure Tornado Shot build at this point with some good single target, because there's not too many other skills that double as your area and your single target these days without having to change anything in your setup. So for bosses I change absolutely nothing and I go straight in from my area skill into my single target, and that makes it a pretty comfortable playstyle, and the damage so far has been very nice indeed, and I can't wait to see how it goes against some tougher content. So I will hopefully have a few of the sort of later game boss kills coming up in the next few days for you guys with this character. It probably won't be that amazing because the Guardians themselves have quite a lot of challenges for a character like this. Some of them are bleed immune, some of them are poison immune, some of them are both. So that makes it a lot harder, and probably only the Phoenix is going to be the one where I have my full-blown DPS. As well as that, Uber Itziri Tornado Shot sucks because you'll be hitting the mirror ad on the split phase if you don't swap out your skill. So that kind of makes that a bit uncomfortable too. Shaper himself, I trust, should go well, but we'll see how that goes when we get there. At the moment, the character itself has been going great for mapping, and I've been enjoying it a lot. If it doesn't shape up too well against endgame bosses and guardians, I'm not too fussed. Everything up to tier 15 has been great with this, and that's all I really wanted to know with the build, because there's nothing too specific required in it. Obviously, I'm using a 6-link Death's Opus, which I managed to link up myself, but the bow's not hard to get, and a 5-link will still perform pretty comfortably. The 2 secondary Tornado Shot projectiles on the helm is a bit expensive and hard to get, but without that I think it'll still perform just fine, and everything else is kind of just stock standard sort of rare gear, a Belly of the Beast. But steel rings do go a very long way to making a Death's Opus much closer to a Rare Harbinger or a Reach of the Council, because its initial fizz is not very high, as you can see, 90 to 200. So things like steel rings bring it up quite substantially, so you do want to invest very heavily into your jewelry and your quiver to get some real nice additional fizz damage. So Drill Neck has quite a lot of fizz there, and you want steel rings with fizz as well as some other bits and pieces, like an added chaos roll if you can afford to get something like that. Otherwise, crit multi everywhere else is pretty nice, but the bow itself has 150 crit multi, so that makes crit multi where you'd normally need it a little less needed. So yeah, the build itself is based around the assassin stuff here, Noxious Strike and Toxic Delivery. So we have a lot of chance to poison and bleed over here. You'll almost always have a bleed up on something, but your poison chance is initially 40% chance against bleeding targets. And then with this node down here, you have an additional 25%, so that's 65%. And then you can also grab 10% over here, giving a total of 75% against bleeding targets. And that means you don't need Snake Bites, a Poison Gem, or Cospre's Will, and I will probably end up grabbing this too. I think that should be enough for a good effective poison damage, but Bleed does quite a lot of our damage as well, because we have quite a high amount of flat fizz and vulnerability scaling and a bit of damage over time too. And most of our gems do scale our bleed as well. So you got your Fizz Proj, your Pierce, your Slower Proj. GMP, of course, however, does give you 26% less projectile damage, and that's why Reach of the Council can be so desired, because it usually does let you drop the GMP and then replace it with something else. And in this case, I'd probably use a crit multi or a faster attacks, something like that. But for the biggest bleeds possible, it would be a crit multi. Right now, I'm happy with my setup, and if it does everything as it should with just GMP in it, I'm not going to bother changing it. That's perfectly fine and gives a very nice playstyle for your general mapping and then your boss killing. Of course, we also have a Sin's Rebirth, which is a pretty new addition to something like a bow build. You get Unholy Might during Flask effect, and with its Series Promise as well, we get quite a lot of chaos damage in the build, as well as the added chaos gem. So currently, sitting at half my damage being fizz, half my damage being chaos of my fizz. Pop both the flasks, and all of a sudden we have way more chaos than we do fizz. So that's where your poison scaling comes off of, making Sin's Rebirth quite nice in this sort of a build. Can also use a Dying Sun. Can use a Dying Sun on top of all of this, but so far I haven't felt the need for a Dying Sun. It's 2 additional projectiles, and that would be really good for Tornado Shot, but it feels a bit overkill right now since I currently have 7 projectiles, 7 arrows, and that's pretty damn good. Now you can see the Helm Enchant does go a long way towards making the AoE a bit better, and as well as that, your single target in the end. It's not strictly necessary, I don't think, but it does make the build a lot better, especially for the single target. You can see we fire off a lot more arrows on that secondary shit. I'll probably go over the rest of the setup in general after I kill some more bosses and stuff, and then have a more concrete idea of whether or not it's completely worth playing. At this stage, I think it's a pretty good build just for general mapping, and it shouldn't completely break the bank. Of course, a 6-link here is pretty damn nice, but I don't think entirely necessary. Drill necks are very cheap, and we do have 100% projectile pierce, so then we get 100% damage from that, and that is because I'm using the pierce support here as well as grabbing these over here. So 40% plus 50% plus another 10, that does currently make 100%, and that's, a +1 drill neck would be a lot better, obviously, but this is fine too and doesn't cost anything. In general, character's been going pretty well. I will be mapping with it for another couple days, maybe even more, because it's been very fun to play with, and I've been looking for a character to push into a bit higher 90s, so maybe 93, 94, that sort of thing. I'll just leave you guys with this for now though, and maybe talk about it a bit more in the next video if it feels worth doing. So this is the Assassin Tornado Shot Bleed Poison character with the Death's Opus. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.